Okay, so we're working with the rules of negative numbers, directed numbers. So we've got to see how positive numbers and negative numbers combine, and we've got to remember the rules of these numbers. So when we're adding and subtracting with negatives, we really ought to remember that if we've got the same signs physically next to each other, whether it's a positive sign or two positive signs next to each other or two negative signs next to each other, then they always change into a single operation. You're going to end up doing a takeaway sum. If we've got two different signs next to each other, so we've got a plus and a minus sign and a minus and a plus sign next to each other, or we're dealing with a positive and a negative next to each other and a negative positive, then these two will always combine to give you a, oops, got that the wrong way around, guys. Two signs the same next to each other, they agree with each other and become a plus sum. Two different signs next to each other, then they change and become a takeaway sum. So we look at the first one here. We've got a plus and a minus sign next to each other, a plus and a negative sign next to each other. Then we end up turning this into a takeaway sum. So 5 take away 3 is 2. Now, when we're timesing and dividing, then we've got to think of the rules in a slightly different way. And what we're saying to ourselves is, if we have a negative number and we're multiplying by a positive number, then the answer is always going to give you so many negatives. So it's going to be a negative answer. If we have the same signs, in terms of we've got the same operations going on, a negative times a negative, then we end up with a positive answer. And the rules work the same for division. So if I've got a negative divide by a positive, then the answer is going to be a negative. And if I've got two negative numbers being divided, then I'll end up with a positive answer, because there'll be so many of those negatives within the negative, and that must be a positive result. And these just swap around, so if it was a positive divided by a negative, you'll still get a negative answer and so forth, because you've got two different signs involved for the multiplication and division sum. But we have to be careful, there's two different types of sums to do, guys. When we're adding or subtracting, it's all about the signs being next to each other to change. When you're timesing and dividing, it's about positives and negatives being combined to make different sums. So a negative combined with a positive when you're multiplying and dividing, you'll get a negative answer, so forth. So here we've got a negative number, -8, and we're timesing by a positive, +7. So we're working with a negative times a positive, so our answer will be a negative answer. So we've got 8 times 7, which is 56, but the final answer has to be a negative, so -56. With this division sum, we've got a negative number here, -64, divided by another negative number, -8. So negative divided by negative will always give us a positive answer, because we're seeing how many of those -8s go into -64. Well, it can get 8 of them, so this is going to be +8. Here we've got -3 squared, so we just have to remember that means we're doing -3 times itself, squaring times the number by itself. So we've got a negative times a negative, so a negative times a negative will give us a positive result. So this will give me +9. So it equals +9, but we just write 9 because a number on its own is always considered to be a plus in front, so it's positive. This last one, we've got -56 minus -45. Well, here we can see that we have two negative signs combined with each other, or two next to each other, so they change into a plus. So this sum becomes -56 plus 45. Now we need to be really careful here, guys. We've either got to think about our number line and what this sum's telling us to do. It's telling us somewhere on this number line we're at -56 to start with, and then we're adding, so we're going to count up the line 45 spaces. So that's going to take us up, but it's not going to be enough to get us past 0, so we're going to end up at -11. The other way of thinking about this sum is, once you've got the sum in this position, you can actually think of it as 45 take away 56. We can just swap that to that position, and that goes with it. So it becomes 45 take away 56, and that tells you again that you'd end up with a negative answer. You try to take more away than what you had originally. So either way, you should get an answer of -11. it's worth practicing these. You've got calculators, so just keep making sums up. Just make a sum up. So -4 plus -8. Work out what you think the answer is, and then on your calculator you have either a negative key that looks like that, or on these type of calculators we have the plus or minus key, which changes the numbers into positives or negatives. So you've got the plus or minus key as well. So if I was to just check this sum, I think the answer to this sum is going to be, well, these two are next to each other, so they're unhappy, so they'll change into a takeaway. So this sum becomes -4 take away 8. So I've started at -4, I'm taking 8 more away, so I end up at -12. So we can check that. So on this calculator we've got 4, press the plus or minus key, that's now -4. We're adding, and we're going to be adding -8. So 8, press that negative key, so that's going to be -8. And the final answer is going to be -12. So again, if you're not sure of these rules, then just make up sums, and just practice. So -7 times -10. Negative times negative makes a positive answer. They agree with each other when you're timesing. So we think the answer is going to be positive 70. So -7 times -10, positive 70. So just practice them until you get it, guys, because it's important you understand how numbers work when it involves negatives as well as positives.